So if you have a leaky pipe that's, just completely flooding your kitchen right now, you don't generally sit down, cross your legs, and pray to the universe to magically fix the plumbing.
Right. No, you call a plumber, obviously.
Exactly. Or if your tooth is throbbing, you call a dentist. We are incredibly comfortable with this idea of specialization in our physical, everyday lives. But, and this is the big question, why is it that the moment we talk about seeking help from the unseen, like higher spiritual entities, divas, deities, wait, no, I shouldn't use the word deities yet, but these higher beings, why do we automatically view that as an act of profound religious worship?
Oh, because it gets incredibly messy when we try to force our everyday logic onto spiritual practices. Or honestly, when we just abandon logic entirely because something is, metaphysical.
Right. Like, why can't we just treat it as calling in a cosmic specialist to fix a localized problem?
Because we tend to default to this really rigid binary. It's either uh, ultimate submissive devotion to a creator or it's complete eye-rolling skepticism. There usually isn't this middle ground where spirituality is just treated as advanced, highly specialized mechanics.
Which is the exact friction we are unpacking in today's deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking through a highly practical, almost clinical framework presented by a really fascinating figure. He's known as Osman, the blind Muslim yogi.
Yeah, he's quite the character.
He really is. And our mission today is to explore his perspective on these higher frequency beings. He basically bridges ancient mysticism with a very pragmatic modern mindset that frankly completely flips the script on how humans interact with the unseen world.
It really does.
And just to set the ground rules for you listening, because Osman touches on Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, even Satanism, we want to be super clear. We aren't here today to champion one specific religion or endorse any political or social viewpoints.
Right, strictly neutral.
Exactly. We're just impartially exploring Osman's personal, pluralistic worldview based on the source material provided. We just want to see how this engine actually runs.
Well, to understand that engine, you have to understand the mechanic who built it, right? So Osman is 57 years old, but he actually only lost his physical sight 3 years ago.
Wow, so he had sight for 54 years.
Exactly. For 54 years, he perceived the world exactly as most of us do. But alongside that totally normal life, he spent 50 years practicing yoga and meditation. And he eventually became this master-level bioenergy healer. He specializes in critical care and telepathic healing.
Let's pause there for a second because telepathic healing and bioenergy can sound like total buzzwords to some people.
Fair enough.
For anyone unfamiliar, we are basically talking about the practice of interacting with the human body's electromagnetic field. Practitioners believe they can manipulate or clear that energetic field to promote physical healing. Sometimes even from a distance, which is where that telepathic or non-local aspect comes in. It's treating the body like a circuit board rather than just a collection of meat and bones.
And that circuit board analogy is perfect because it's exactly how he approaches spirituality as a whole. He chose Islam as his personal faith because he found it simple and it suited his specific wiring. He literally uses the phrase, different strokes for different folks.
I love that. Very casual.
Right. He isn't approaching the unseen from a place of dogmatic isolation. He's approaching it like a technician. He treats and respects everyone, including friends who are Satanists. And that background leads directly to his central thesis, which is invoking a deity or a diva is not worship.
Wait, really? Not worship at all?
Not to him. In Eastern traditions, a deva is essentially a being of light or an elevated energy. Osman argues that calling on them is just the functional utilization of a specific skill set.
Oh, that makes so much sense with the analogy he uses. He gives this incredibly grounded example. So imagine you have a child who is deathly ill. You don't just sit in an empty room and pray to the ultimate creator to fix it. You take the child to a doctor.
Right, a specialist.
Yeah. And if that doctor realizes the issue is highly complex, they send you to an even more specialized expert, like a pediatric cardiologist. You aren't worshiping the cardiologist by going to them for help,
You're not building a shrine to the doctor in your living room.
Exactly. You are simply utilizing their highly specialized skill to solve a problem. You don't have the frequency of knowledge to solve yourself.
And Osman says it scales across every aspect of human life. If your car breaks down, you take it to a specialized service center, right? BMW, Toyota, or Kia mechanic. Or if you want to study quantum physics or psychology or even advanced pottery, you go to a university. You learn under a professor who has dedicated their entire life to that exact field. You go to them because they possess a concentration of knowledge that you currently lack. Osman is arguing that the universe operates on this exact same principle.
So higher frequency entities are basically just professors and mechanics operating in a different medium.
Yeah, exactly.
But, okay, playing devil's advocate here. If we accept that premise, that the cosmos is basically a giant gig economy of specialists, why is there so much intense religious conflict around this? Like, why do people view it as idolatry?
That's the big pushback.
Right, because if someone believes in an all-powerful, omniscient creator God, why wouldn't they just go straight to the top for absolutely everything? Why bother navigating the, middle management of the universe?
Well, Osman answers that by introducing what we could call the menial task concept. In his view, the ultimate creator is the foundational source of everything, incredibly high up in the hierarchy. And to put it in his rather unfiltered words, God is not your dog to do menial tasks.
Oh, wow, that is blunt.
Very blunt. But think about it. The last time you were stressed about a job interview or a final exam or trying to secure a loan for a business.
I definitely sent up a prayer.
Right. Most people send a prayer straight to the ultimate creator of the cosmos to help them out. Osman is basically saying, you are calling the President of the United States to fix a pothole in your driveway.
Okay, when you put it like that, it does sound a bit absurd.
It's an issue of scale and localized function. If you are struggling to pass an exam, or you want to fix a minor business hurdle, or even if you want to become more charismatic to attract a partner, in the grand cosmic scheme, those are highly localized, low-level issues.
So there's an entity for that.
Osman argues there are specific mantras and deities designed to handle those exact frequencies. You don't petition the CEO of the universe to fix a paper jam in the copy machine. You call IT.
That makes logical sense, but it still leaves a massive question for me. If these entities are essentially just cosmic IT workers or specialized professors, why do humans have such a historical tendency to accidentally worship them?
Oh, right.
Where does the impulse to build temples and offer sacrifices come from if they're just mechanics?
Osman says it comes from our hardware short-circuiting. It's the sheer overwhelming nature of the encounter. He explains this illusion of divinity using a brilliant pop culture reference, the old movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah. So in that film, an isolated African tribe encounters a modern human for the first time. The tribe encounters someone who looks entirely different, flies in an airplane, and drops a glass Coca-Cola bottle from the sky.
Right. They've never seen any of that before.
Because the tribe has absolutely zero context for any of this technology or biology, they immediately assume the man and the object are divine. They bow down and worship him.
They completely lack the framework to process what they are seeing, so their brains just default to God.
Precisely. Osman argues that humans do the exact same thing when they encounter a higher frequency being. If a luminous, effulgent, overwhelmingly peaceful Devel suddenly materializes in front of you, your physical senses are going to be completely overloaded.
Yeah, I'd probably fall on my face too.
Anyone would. The natural human reflex born of awe and a total lack of energetic context is to fall to your knees and worship it. You assume it's the ultimate creator because it is the most powerful thing you personally have ever perceived.
But Osman is saying that's just a higher frequency life form. It is an empowered entity, but it is not the ultimate God principle. And he points to a modern physical world example to illustrate this, which I thought was super interesting. He talks about Sadhguru.
Oh, right, Sadhguru.
He notes that Sadhguru is a living, breathing human who is operating at a phenomenally high power level. He points out that Sadhguru can walk into a room and instantly mass initiate hundreds of people energetically, which is something Osman says he himself cannot do. He can only work on one person at a time.
And yet, Sadhguru doesn't claim to be the ultimate creator. He doesn't demand religious worship. He operates on the Advaita principle.
For you listening, if you're unfamiliar with that term, Advaita is essentially the non-dualistic philosophy that the ultimate creator and the universe aren't two separate things. God isn't a guy sitting on a cloud managing the universe. God is the underlying fabric of reality itself.
Everything else is just a manifestation of that fabric at different voltages.
Exactly. Sadhguru is simply a human conducting a much higher voltage than the average person. He is a specialist, which kind of transitions us from understanding what these specialists are to the much more practical question of how a normal human actually books an appointment with them.
How do you interface with a frequency you can't see?
Right. And this is where Osman's personal journey gets really intense. It took him 10 solid years of disciplined practice just to experience his first Kundalini awakening.
10 years. That is massive.
It is. And for context, Kundalini is often described in Eastern traditions as this dormant, highly concentrated, energetic potential resting at the base of the spine. When it awakens, it travels up the central nervous system. It can be profoundly enlightening, but also physically and psychologically overwhelming if you aren't prepared for it.
It's essentially running 1,000 volts through a nervous system wired for 110. And after that initial 10-year spark, it took Osman another 30 years to figure out how to actually regulate and control that energy.
30 years just to control it.
That is 40 years total just to master his own internal spiritual technology. He actually compares his timeline to the famous mystic Gopi Krishna, who took 34 years to reach full enlightenment. I mean, Gopi Krishna spent 17 years just to have his first profound experience, and then another 15 plus years for his biology to actually mature enough to handle that state permanently.
So historically, mystics were basically trying to start a fire by rubbing two wet sticks together for decades. But, and this is the crazy part, Osman didn't just accept that 40-year timeline as the only valid path.
He definitely didn't.
He claims that by synthesizing teachings from across the globe, the East, the Middle East, the West, and crucially, integrating modern insights from the scientific community, he essentially brought a blowtorch to the process.
A blowtorch is a good way to put it.
He refined the protocols so dramatically that he can now teach a student to safely control their kundalini and even have an out-of-body experience in a simple 1 to 2 hour session.
It is a staggering claim. But his logic is that the traditional, decades-long paths were heavily obscured by cultural dogma, unnecessarily complex rituals, and geographic isolation. By stripping away all that cultural wrapping paper and focusing entirely on the raw bioelectric mechanics of the human nervous system and pure energetic resonance, he bypassed the friction.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on that timeline a bit. You can't just compress 40 years of biological and spiritual maturation into an afternoon over tea. What is the actual mechanism he is using to speed that up? Is he acting as an energetic jumper cable for the student?
That is actually a highly accurate way to put it. Because he spent 40 years building his own energetic capacity, he acts as the localized specialist. He can temporarily lend his frequency to the student, stabilizing their nervous system while guiding them through the exact mechanical breathwork and focus required to trigger the experience safely.
Wow.
Yeah, he is providing the architectural blueprint and the scaffolding simultaneously.
Okay, that makes sense from an energetic transfer standpoint.
Yeah.
But it still demands a functional understanding of reality that bridges subjective mystical experiences with objective, tangible science.
Yeah.
Up until now, everything we've discussed sounds beautiful, but highly internal.
Right, very mystical.
Is there any physical scientific framework for this energy or these specialized entities? Or are we just talking about vivid psychological states in the mind's eye?
Well, Osman leans heavily into the idea that science is actively catching up to ancient mysticism, specifically through the lens of quantum physics. He argues that quantum mechanics is increasingly providing the theoretical math to prove the existence of other dimensions and the reality of higher frequency entities.
He cites Billy Carson, right?
Yeah, he mentions Billy Carson and his Forbidden Knowledge platform as an example of modern research attempting to establish a scientific base for these phenomena.
Right, because in string theory and quantum mechanics, you have the mathematical necessity of multiple dimensions folded into our own. If reality is fundamentally just vibrating strings of energy, then different dimensions are just different frequencies occupying the same physical space.
Exactly like radio stations.
Yes, just like how dozens of radio stations are broadcasting through your living room right now. You can't see them or hear them, but if you tune a receiver to the exact right frequency, the music suddenly exists in your reality. Osman is saying divas and entities are just broadcasting on a frequency our physical eyes aren't tuned to catch.
Precisely. But Osman doesn't just stick to the theoretical physics of light beings. He goes to the absolute opposite end of the spectrum and gives an incredibly wild example for anyone demanding hard, touch it with your hands, empirical evidence.
Oh, you mean the Indonesian bottles?
Yes. The Indonesian gin bottles.
I have to admit, when I read this part of the source material, my brain completely short-circuited.
It sounds like pure folklore, but Osman presents it as a literal physical practice. He explains that there's a sect in Indonesia that allegedly traps lower frequency entities, what some traditions call evil spirits or jinn, inside physical bottles.
Inside actual bottles.
Yeah, and they sell them as bound helpers. It is framed purely as a business transaction. An agreement is made where the entity performs tasks in the physical world in exchange for something else. Osman bluntly challenges skeptics. He says, if you want empirical evidence, go to Indonesia, buy a bottle, bring it home, and put it under a microscope, open it up, and see what hatches.
Hold on. Let's look at the mechanics of this, because it sounds absurd on its face. Glass is just melted sand. How does melted sand trap an interdimensional energetic frequency? Are we talking about some kind of electromagnetic binding, or is the bottle just a psychological focal point for the practitioner?
It's a crucial question of mechanics. From Osman's functional perspective, these lower frequency entities jinn are much closer to the dense frequency of physical matter than a high-level daba is. They aren't purely ethereal. They operate on the borderland of the physical.
Okay.
The practitioners who bind them aren't just using an empty Snapple bottle. They're using specific acoustic mantras, geometric symbols, and organic materials inside the bottle to create a localized, inescapable electromagnetic field. The glass is just the physical housing for an energetic Faraday cage.
Okay, viewing it as a localized Faraday cage makes the physics slightly more palatable than just, magic. And he references movies like Poltergeist and The Exorcist in the same breath.
Yeah.
He obviously isn't saying Hollywood horror movies or documentaries, but he's arguing that the core premise that dense, lower-frequency realities exist and can physically manipulate our environment is grounded in actual energetic mechanics.
It perfectly illustrates the vast spectrum of his framework. You have highly evolved, luminous divas operating as cosmic cardiologists at the top, and you have trapped lower-frequency jinn being used as indentured gig workers at the bottom. But whether high or low, Osman insists they are all just life forms operating on different frequencies. They are all part of the same cosmic ecosystem, subject to universal laws.
Which brings us back from the bizarre world of bottled spirits to the deeply practical, compassionate side of this framework. How does treating the universe as a multidimensional hospital actually help a normal person in crisis?
Osman points specifically to Tibetan Buddhist methodologies to show the practical life-saving application of this knowledge. He highlights the Tibetan devi known as Tara, and note that he specifically calls her a deity rather than a goddess, again reinforcing that she is an empowered specialist, not the ultimate creator.
Right. And he notes that throughout history, and even today, people facing absolutely distraught, life-threatening emergency situations have invoked Tara, using specific ancient mantras. And time again, lives have been saved. But let's look at the how. A mantra isn't just a magic word you say to get a wish granted. In this framework, a mantra is a specific acoustic signature.
Exactly. It's an energetic phone number.
If you dial 911 on a disconnected phone, nobody is coming. But if you use the correct acoustic resonance, the mantra, you tune your own brainwaves and energetic field to the exact frequency of that specific Devi. You create a bridge.
The right connection.
Yeah. Osman says these people needed emergency intervention, they used the correct handset to call the right specialist, and the help arrived. If you are drowning in the ocean, you don't care if the lifeguard is the CEO of the beach. You just need the lifeguard to pull you out.
And this pragmatic view highlights Osman's deep frustration with religious infighting, which he sees as incredibly counterproductive and totally ignorant of universal mechanics. He gives very pointed examples of narrow interpretations causing unnecessary conflict.
Like the friction between Muslims and Hindus.
Yes. For instance, he talks about Muslims heavily criticizing Hindus, claiming Hindus are just worshipping stones. Osman argues this completely ignores the complex energetic science behind consecrating an idol, which is essentially turning a physical object into a resonant battery for a specific frequency.
He is equally critical of extremism within his own chosen faith of Islam, too.
Very critical.
He mentions extremist Muslims attacking other Muslims for praying at the graves of saints or descendants of the Prophet, like Hussein. The extremists claim that asking for help from anyone other than God directly is idolatry. And Osman's counter-argument to this is brilliant in its simplicity.
What did he say?
He basically says, then why do you go to the supermarket? Why do you go to work to earn a paycheck? If you must only rely directly on God for absolutely everything, then just sit in an empty room and wait for cash and groceries to magically materialize in your lap.
It's a perfect reduction to absurdity. He is pointing out that the Creator built a universe entirely composed of interconnected systems, hierarchies, and cause and effect relationships. Utilizing those systems, whether it's the agricultural system for food or the energetic system of a saint for spiritual aid, isn't a lack of faith. It is simply participating intelligently in the reality you were born into.
And this brings up one of his most profound points regarding human arrogance. It is deeply ironic that human beings confidently declare what is and isn't real in the spiritual realm based solely on what our physical eyes can see. Osman points out that bees see an entirely different spectrum of ultraviolet light than we do.
Oh, for sure.
Owls can see exponentially more in the dark. Cats, dogs, their hearing and sense of smell construct a physical reality that is vastly richer, more complex, and fundamentally different than ours.
We readily accept that our physical senses are embarrassingly limited compared to the animal kingdom. We know a dog whistle makes a sound even if we can't hear it. So why on earth do we arrogantly assume that our spiritual or energetic vision is absolute and infallible?
Especially coming from a man who spent 54 years seeing the physical world and then had that sense completely stripped away. Losing his sight 3 years ago forced his reliance entirely onto his energetic perception. He states with absolute conviction that despite lacking physical vision, his mind's eye, his eye of wisdom, sees far more clearly than many people who have perfect 20/20 physical sight.
Because he is no longer distracted by the optical illusions of the surface level. He is looking at the underlying code of the matrix.
And that leads directly to his ultimate message, which is a passionate plea for pluralism and relentless curiosity. He urges people to use what he calls the handset, meaning the smartphone in your pocket, to actually research, explore, and widen your knowledge base before you point fingers, judge, or label people based on superficial criteria.
He absolutely rejects those surface labels for himself, by the way. He says he objects to being identified by race, rejecting terms like black or brown. He just wants to be identified purely as Osman. He has his specific energetic challenges, he has his strengths, just like any other localized expression of life.
So what does this all mean for you listening today? If we distill Osman's entire 40-year journey, his bioenergy healing, and his frankly wild array of experiences down to a single actionable takeaway, it is this Osman's framework invites us to fundamentally change our relationship with the universe.
He is asking us to stop viewing the cosmos as a strict, rigid monarchy where you are only allowed to bother the king for every tiny problem you encounter. Instead, he suggests we view reality as a vast, multidimensional university or a massive, incredibly well-staffed hospital.
It is filled to the brim with specialists, from the quantum mechanics of higher dimensions to the specific acoustic frequencies of Tibetan mantras. And all of these specialists are simply waiting for you to dial the right number.
Whether you choose to view Osman's perspective literally as hard empirical physics involving multidimensional entities, or whether you view it purely as a highly effective psychological framework for focusing your own internal energy, the core lesson is identical. It is a lesson about demanding practical, tangible results from your practices.
Right.
It's about embracing a pluralistic view of the world and flat out refusing to be paralyzed by narrow, dogmatic interpretations of what is possible.
It is about acknowledging that reality is far more complex and perhaps far more helpful than our limited mammalian senses lead us to believe. Which brings us right back to the kitchen plumbing. If you have a leaky pipe, you call a plumber. If you have a spiritual, emotional, or energetic blockage that you just can't seem to clear yourself, maybe you don't need to petition the heavens and wait for a miracle. Maybe you just need to find the right mechanic.
I think that's the perfect way to look at it.
So we want to leave you with this lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. If we adopt Osman's perspective that the universe is truly teeming with specialized professors and doctors operating on frequencies just outside our normal perception, what specific cosmic specialist would you want to book an appointment with today? And more importantly, if your thoughts and actions are the energetic phone number you are dialing, what frequency are you currently broadcasting to attract them?